Umpisahan po natin ang ating program ngayong araw sa pamamagitan ng isang panalangin to be led by Father Albert Alejo, SJ.
Damahin po natin ngayon ang ating ugnayan sa Panginoon, Panginoon ng individual na buhay at kasaysayan. Panginoon, binibiyayaan mo kami paminsan-minsan ng ilang pinuno na may mabuting layunin at dalisay na puso. Tulad ni ng mahal naming Pangulong PNoy Aquino. Turuan mo kaming makaalala at huwag makalimot. Turuan mong magpahalaga sa mga aral na sa kanya'y mapupulot. Mula sa leader tulad ni Pangulong PNoy Aquino. At ngayon sa bagong yugto ng aming kasaysayan, muli mo kaming padalhan ng leader na ayon sa iyong kalooban. Ngayong dinig mo ang daing ng mga ulilang bunso at panganay. Dama mo ang bigat sa mga balikat ng walang hanap buhay. Kaakbay ka namin sa pagluluksa at pakikipaglamay. Kakampi ka namin sa pagtuligsa sa tanang mga panghahalay. Panginoon, palayain mo ang mga ikinulong ng walang katarungan. Palabasin mo sa pagtalukbong ang mga alagad ng mga simbahan. Padalahan mo kami ng mga pinunong matino at marangal, hindi bastos o garapal, at wag pong kriminal. Pinunong may puso na kayang yumuko sa nasalaylayan. Walang lansa ng dugo ang kanilang pangalan at angkan. Pinunong uusig sa mga kasabwat ng gahamang kawatan. Pinunong didilig sa binhing katapangan ng bayanit baylan. Pinunong hihilom sa kairaming sugat sa aming kasaysayan. Pinunong pupukaw sa pagiging kapwa at pagkamamamayan. Pinunong may pagturing sa sari-saring lahi at kasarian. Pinunong may pitagan sa biyayang gubat at mga karagatan. Pinunong loob ay dalisay, palakad ay mahusay, at kagalang-galang, makadiyos at makabayan, walang labis, walang kulang. Amen.
Amen.
Nagkakasakit at naapektuhan ang kanilang mga kabuhayan.
Tatlo na malalaking minahan sa ating bansa ang ipinasasara na ng DNR. Unti-unti na rin kumakalat ang forest fire o yung sunog po sa bundok sa Bukod Benguet.
Mabilis ang pagtaas ng baha sa Rizal Avenue sa Arpapa sa boundary ng Maynila at Caloocan City. Kasabay naman ang pagragasa ng baha ay ang mga basura.
Sa tala ng World Health Organization, 7 milyong tao ang namamatay kada taon dahil sa air pollution.
O bayan ko, kailan ka mamumulat? Ang totoo'y nakikita na pumipikit ka pa.
Kailan ba kapag wala ka nang magagawa, kapag wala ka nang ibubuga,
bayan ko,
Kailan ka matutulog? Sadyang ikaw ang kalaban mo, ikaw rin ang susubok.
ngunit kailan kapag wala ka nang magagawa, kapag wala ka nang ibubuga.
Bayan ko, kailan ka tatayo? Kay rami ng dugong inalay sa'yo.
o bayan ko, ang oras ay madalas.
Kapag wala ka nang magagawa, kapag wala ka nang
O bayan ko, kailan ka tatayo? Kailan inatubong inalay sa'yo? Bayan ko, ang oras ay malapit nang maubos. Bangon na, bumangon bayan ko.
Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. And once again, we welcome you sa isa na namang edisyon ng ating media forum na pinamagatang Tapatan, Isang Bayan. At para po sa ating tapatan ngayong linggo, mayroon tayong tribute para kay dating Pangulong Benigno Noynoy Aquino III sa ika-40 araw ng kanyang pagpanaw o pagkamatay. Ang title po ng ating forum ngayon ay Up Close and Personal, What PNoy Taught Me. Sino ba talaga si Pinoy? Istrikto ba siya? Masarap ba siyang katrabaho? Ano kaya ang kanyang paboritong gawin bilang individual, bilang presidente na pinakamataas na pinuno natin sa Malacanang? We will discuss po mga little known facts tungkol sa ating dating presidente at mga inspiring stories ng kanyang buhay, his integrity, and his resolve as leader of our nation. Pero bago po ang lahat, panoorin po muna natin ang ating hinandang video tungkol sa dating Pangulong Pinoy.
Ang layunin ko sa buhay ay simple lang. Maging tapat sa aking mga magulang at sa bayan bilang isang marangal na anak, mabait na kuya at mabuting mamamayan.
You may have the might, but that doesn't necessarily make you right. And if we in turn do not protect our rights, then we cannot expect anybody else to protect our rights.
We had to take on all those who had a misplaced sense of entitlement, who believed that they had more rights than their fellow Filipinos.
To the Filipino people, may we never lose our patience with the ways of democracy, and may we never take it for granted or be passive in its defense.
Hanggat buo ang ating pananalig at tiwala. At hanggat nagsisilbi tayong lakas ng isa't isa. Patuloy nating mapapatunayan na the Filipino is worth dying for. The Filipino is worth living for. At idagdag ko naman po, the Filipino is definitely worth fighting for.
Ayan po, napanood po natin ang video. Napakasarap po paniwalaan, napakasarap maging Pilipino, that the Filipino is not only worth dying and living for. Sabi ng ating dating Pangulong Pinoy, the Filipino is also worth fighting for. Para po sa ating tapatan ngayon, ang ating mga panelists po ay mga haligi ng Administrasyong Aquino. Simula po sa ating dalawang conveners na si Retired Ombudsman Justice Conchita Carpio Morales at si Secretary Teresita Guindeles, dating Peace Process Advisor. Kasama naman sa ating mga guest panelists natin ngayon, ang dating Deputy Spokesperson na si Attorney Abigail Valte, dating BIR Commissioner Kim Henares, at dating Social Secretary na si Susan Reyes. Simulan na po natin ngayon ang ating tapatan. Una pong magsasalita ay si Justice Conchita Carpio Morales. Ma'am, you already have the floor po.
A pleasant morning to all. In his June 15 letter to me as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, then Senator Benigno Aquino III wrote that it would be his distinct honor if I would administer his oath of office as President of the Republic of the Philippines. I replied that in accepting the role, the honor was mine. Immediately, he replied, conveying his gratitude with hope to see the day and integrity would be common staple. So, administer I did the President's oath of office at the Luneta Grandstand, where I met for the first time President Benigno Aquino. Pinoy was gracious enough to send me a photograph of the oath-taking, on which he sent the following words: onward to a brighter future for our country where justice is real for our people. It was accompanied by his signature. More than a month after my retirement from the Supreme Court on June 19, 2011, I was about to state the date of my birth. Two cabinet members personally informed me that on instructions of the President, they would convey to me that I would be appointed ombudsman during the second SONA in July 2011. Indeed, I was going to be appointed, Malacanang asked for my photograph, and after a painstaking search from a heap, I finally found one that is pleasant to look at, and that was reflective of the youth I had 10 years before. Malacanang lost no time to inform me that the president did not like the picture. That sent me to wondering if he wanted something that would approximate the beauty of his then rumored special one. It turned out that the president wanted me to be present at the sauna. And so, in his second sauna, the president announced my appointment as ombudsman. Soon after he delivered the sauna, he rushed to go home, but not before I could go to him and thank him for the trust he heaped on me. The president replied, "Sa umpisa pa lang, ikaw na talaga ang gusto kong maging ombudsman. Keep your independence." Of course, that was flattering to me because it was a given on his part that I am independent. I thought to myself that if that was the case, that he had already wanted me to be ombudsman in the beginning, the alleged counter arguments of the Balay and Samar groups on their respective choices of who would be ombudsman was an exercise in futility. On the few times that, destiny called for the reversal of roles, because this time the president was the one administering the oath of office to me. He again reminded me to be independent, and he even requested me to go a certain person, and I did, to orient me on how to answer questions during interviews. Kaya mga kaibigan ko sa media, kung nagtataray ako kung minsan sa aking mga interviews, you would know that that's part of the orientation I received from the person referred to by PNoy. On the few times that I met the president in Malacanang at official functions, he always told me to maintain my independence. Talagang broken record yung kanyang sinasabi sa akin. Which I replied, "I won't fail you, Mr. President. I won't fail the nation." And of course, I did not. Mayabang ako, ano ha? Please pardon my modesty. On visiting the wake of my son in October 2015, PNoy recounted his feelings on losing loved ones. He advised me to be strong. I was, and I am. He added that I should take a few days leave, but I did not because I had to fulfill an out-of-town engagement after the burial. I last saw PNoy at the party of a relative who was his classmate of the Ateneo. He was spirited. He was true to form, gracious enough to talk and banter with me. I hope that I have given a little view of how I was during my meetings with the president. I will say a little more when we get to the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ombudsman Morales, for sharing your story about your promise to the former president on how you will not fail in fighting for a corrupt-free country and government, especially by being independent. Maraming salamat po. At sa ngayon naman po, go po to Secretary Ging Deles. Welcome po.
Salamat JP at magandang umaga sa lahat. Lalo na sa ating mga kaibigan sa media na madalas ko namang nakakausap noon. isang karangalan at pribileyo na makasama sa kwentuhan tungkol sa ating yumaong mahal na Pangulong Pinoy. At ang gusto ko sanang ibahagi ngayon is really more about, well, what I worked with him on, yung peace process, more specifically, yung Bangsamoro peace process. Dahil alam naman natin, hindi lang ito yung lamesa na ating sinubaybayan sa paghahanap ng kapayapaan sa Pilipinas, pero yung Bangsamoro peace process, yun yung nabuo at binantayan ng napakarami, hindi lang dito kundi sa buong mundo. Kinoconsider na isang in a way legacy ng ating dating Pangulo. Pero siguro hindi nakikita kung how much he was a part of it, how he had shaped it, how he was actually, aking sasabihin, siguro kung hindi siya, ay wala yung BARM ngayon na nakatayo. Hindi tsamba yung Bangsamoro peace process sa administrasyon ni President Aquino. Binalak ito, pinagplanuhan ito, tinabaho ito. He took risks for it and he stood to make sure it would happen. Yung aming pagtatrabaho over the peace process nagsimula even before he became president. Nung ipinatawag niya ako while he was still in campaigning for the presidency para buuin kasama ng kanyang platform yung track on our policy on Mindanao and on the peace process. Dahil kung naaalala nyo, nung nag-file ng certificate of candidacy si then Senator Aquino together with Senator Rojas, ay meron silang social contract with the Filipino people. Yung tatayuan ng kanyang presidency kung siya ay magwagi. At number 14 dito, yung policy ng for Mindanao na ang sinasabi nga ay umalis doon sa short-sighted, reactive ways towards Mindanao to have a policy, a firm policy that understands the root causes of the armed conflict at work for a just and broadly supported peace. At kaya bago pa naging presidente, bago pa na-elect si President Aquino, ay alam natin na ang prosesong pangkapayapaan, lalong-lalo para sa Mindanao, ay nandun na sa kanyang mindscape. At surely enough, within the first 100 days, and he had asked me to join him back in government in the position of the peace advisor. I ni-reconstitute yung panel, actually yung dalawang panel na nakikiusap sa MILF at nakikiusap sa CPP, NPA, NDF, at binigyan ng presidential instructions, no? Merong parameters yan kung paano ang maaring pagkilos ng negotiations. Siguro ikwento ko lang para lang maging konkreto na yung sinasabi kong hindi lang siya naghihintay ng developments, hindi lang siya naghihintay ng reports, kung hindi talagang pumasok siya at talagang namuno sa paghugis nitong peace process na ito. Siguro tatlong, hopefully maikling kwento. Pagka masalimuot lang yung iba, so I hope I don't go much over time. Pero tatlong kwento. Yung unang kwento, yung meeting ni PNoy kay Chair Murad sa Narita, na nagulat ang buong bansa. Nang lumabas na sa Jano at in-announce na nakipagkita siya kay Chair Murad doon sa Narita. This was in August 2011. At nagulat at lahat at nagtanong bakit yun nangyari. May nagtanong bakit nyo siya dinala, paano nyo siya nakumbinse doon. At nung sinabi ko nga noon sa kanya, sabi niya, sabihin mo sa kanila hindi kayo ang nagdala sa akin, ako ang nagdala sa inyo. At totoo yun. This was his idea. At nangyari ito dahil at that particular time, after about already 3-4 meetings between the panels in Kuala Lumpur, ay nagkaroon ng impasse. No? Alalahanin natin na ang minana ng Aquino administration in terms of the peace process ay magulo. Magulo at ang laki ng pagdududa at ng mga mamamayan at ng MILF. 10 taon yon from 2000, yung malaking gera ni Estrada, na nung 2003, nung naupo si President Arroyo, ay sinumulan uli ang peace process, pero 2003, yun namang inatake naman ang Bulyok. At malaking kaguluhan na naman ang nangyari. At ibinalik na naman yung peace process, pero nung 2008, yung failed MOA AD, nung sinabi na patungo na yung panel para magpirma ng MOA AD, Memorandum of Agreement on the Bangsamoro, na naglabas ang Supreme Court na hindi ito pwede pirmahan dahil may mga binaviolate ng mga constitutional provisions. So nung nag-umpisa yung termino na ito, hindi maganda yung lugar ng lamesa. At after 3 months, nagkaroon na nga ng impasse. Siyempre, ang MILF pinagpumilit na initial na itong dokumentong ito, dapat doon na pagsisimulan. Ang gobyerno naman, sabi, mahirap yan, hindi lang yung sa proseso ng pagpalit ng itong proseso na gusto nyo, napapalitan ang constitution. Mukhang walang mahirap yan hinatnan at we cannot promise you that we will be able to accomplish that. So in a way, it was an impasse at ilang meeting namin with the President, trying to find, so saan ba tayo pwedeng magkita? And after one very long 3-hour meeting, this was with then Chief Negotiator, now Associate Justice Marvic Leonen. 3 hours na wala kaming inaabot at ako'y talagang hinang-hina na ang kalooban. Bigla niyang sinabi, why don't I meet him? Why don't I meet Murad? Maybe kung mag-usap kami, magtinginan kami mata sa mata, baka we can find a way. At nangyari yon. It was confidentially prepared. One day, just one night in Narita, we flew in. The MILF flew in. They met that evening. The next morning, we were out of Narita. At and as soon as we came out of Narita, it was announced. At napakalaking bagay nung meeting na yon. May nagsasabi, ano ba yon? Meron bang mga trade-offs na ginawa doon? Meron bang mga pre-namis doon? Actually, wala. It was really a coming together of people who were representing two sides that had been fighting for decades of war, 17 years of protracted negotiations na nagkita. At sabi ni Pangulo doon nung kinikwento niya sa amin, mahirap sa umpisa. Pero nagpursigi at nakita namin in the end that we sincerely wanted the same path. And it was not negotiations. He did not negotiate for the Philippines. It was a president meeting with a citizen. That was how he looked at it. Who had a big problem. Kailangan mag-usap at magkaintindihan kung ano yung pinanggagalingan ng bawat isa. At ang nangyari doon, na in a meeting where no promises were made. The MILF always said that was the most significant thing for them when they saw that a president would take risks for the peace process. That this president would implement everything that he would sign, that he would going to back up everything that the negotiations would be able to bring. Hindi naging madali yung proseso since then, pero nag-iba ang timpla ng lamesa. At as the MILF themselves described it, instead of being adversarial over the table, hindi na magkaaway, kung hindi, we were common problem solvers. Meron pang mga problema na dadating sa lamesa, let's solve it together. So naging mahirap pa ang usapan. It would take another 6 months before the 10 points of decision was made. and another 8 months before the framework agreement was signed. Pero at no point did you ever doubt na may aalis sa lamesa. At no point was there ever a threat na aalisan ang lamesa because we both knew we were working in the same direction. Yun yung una kong kwento. Yung pangalawang kwento, doon sa framework agreement. Ang alam ng mga nakakarami yung comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro. Big ceremony ito, March 2014. In the Garden of Malacanang dahil yung mga bisita hindi nagkasya doon sa Heroes Hall. Pero before that, there was the framework agreement. Dahil nung nag-uusap yung dalawang panel, nakita na magiging masalimuot itong usaping ito. Maraming masyadong mga parte. Baka kung tatapusin natin muna lahat, baka aabot kung kailan at mawalan na ng pag-asa ang ating mga nagbabantay, mga naghihintay, lalo na yung mga pinaka-apektado nitong hidwaang ito. So ang sabi nila, baka umpisahan natin gumawa tayo ng balangkas. Ito yung framework ng talks. At if we agree on that, then we can say itong parte ito, itong parteng ito pa kailangan pag-usapan. So the framework agreement would have appendices, no? O addendum. Apat nga yun, yung wealth sharing, power sharing, transition modalities, normalization. At nadagdagan pa nung addendum on the Bangsamoro waters. Pero so nung October na, mukhang dadating na doon sa matatapos nila yung framework agreement. Nandun yung panel sa Kuala Lumpur. So I reported to the president, sir, mukhang matatapos nila yung balangkas, baka magkakaroon na ng signing ng framework agreement. So agad-agad sabi niya, let's meet. I need to see kung ano yung laman nito. We need to plan this. Hindi maaring bara-bara ito. Hindi maaring, hindi ito naiintindihan. So that was August 6. And evening that we met, this was with Secretary Butchabad, if I remember right, kasi lagi yung budget dapat nandun na pag-uusapan kung meron kang pipirmahan. At si Secretary Marojas at yung comms team, si Secretary Edwin Lacerda at si Secretary Ricky Carandang. Dahil importante kay Pangulo, paano ito ipararating sa publiko? Paano ito na hindi sila mabubulagta na ano na naman yan? Ano na naman yung pinipirmahan? Ano na naman yan? Hindi namin alam yan. Dapat ito mapaplano. So we met that evening para ayusin, siguraduhin na sa kanya okay yung laman nitong lahat. At he was on the phone with Justice Marvic on some last points. Kinikwento nga nila Justice Marvic that the last word that went into the framework agreement was his. Yung kanilang pinag-iisipan, do you use off the Bangsamoro, for the Bangsamoro, sabi ni Presidente. Why not in the Bangsamoro? And that was the last word that went in. That was how masinop yung kanyang pagbasa nitong dokumento na pipirmahan ng kanyang gobyerno. At plinano yung paano mo nga ito ilalabas. It was clear to him ang dapat mag-a-announce nito yung presidente bago umuwi yung panels at magkaroon ng usap-usapan haka-haka. Dapat klaro sa lahat ano ba ito. So next day, i-announce in the afternoon, Sunday, that was August 7, Sunday, at 1 p.m. there would be a press conference. So we went home that night at 2 a.m. At 9 a.m. we were back in the Malacanang because he met with the Secretary Laila as the Secretary of Justice and Secretary Volts Gasmin as the Secretary of Defense. Para tignan nila, because this was most important. It had to be legal, it had to be constitutional, and it had to be in accordance with our own security requirements. At 11:30, the entire cabinet came, and he told them this is what is going to be happened. Next week, this is going to be signed. You look at it now. If you have any concerns, if you have any questions, you say it now. Kasi once I announce it, yun na yun. Huwag kayong magsasalita mamaya. Pag natapos na, sasabihin nyo, meron pala kayong mga question dito. And at 1 o'clock, he went and announced that it would happen and gave the broad frame on it. And that is when he said that this region shall be called the Bangsamoro. And ang kwento nga sa atin ng mga nasa panel, they were watching it from Kuala Lumpur at yung mga taga-MILF, these old, driven combatants were weeping to hear the President of the Philippines give that recognition. And I'll just say that it wasn't the only time na nagpuyat si Pangulo. May marami pang puyat na ginawa. Bago transmit yung BOL up to 2:30 with leaders of Congress to discuss ano yung provision on Lanao Lake. Dahil importante yon. Importante na maibigay, may kapangyarihan ang Bangsamoro doon, pero importante rin na yung ibang umaasa doon sa tubig na yon ay hindi madedehado. Okay, one quick final story. After the signing of the framework agreement, this was in Malacanang. After they signed, may one-on-one si Presidente Aquino kay Chief Murad dahil lagi yun ang nangyayari. He wanted to know, meron pa bang gustong sabihin sa kanya? And after that, he called us and he said, ang sabi ni Chair Murad, ngayon na nakapirma na ng framework agreement, we should start developing their areas. Kasi dapat maramdaman ng mga communities na itong peace na ito, hindi para sa kanya, para sa kanila. Hindi kagaya ng dati, yung mga leader lang nakikinabang. Dapat maramdaman ng communities yung peace dividend. At nabuo yung sa Jahatra Bangsamoro, which under the direct supervision of the Office of the President. So in a way yun, pinagtrabahuhan, he took risks for it, he worked for it, nagpuyat siya, he understood everything. And in the end, the bottom line, na dapat nararamdaman ito. Nitong mga communities na lalong-lalo na yung mga naapektuhan, that this would be a peace, na walang maiiwanan, this would be a peace for all. Maraming salamat.
Thank you very much po, Sec Ging. Now we want to hear po from Commissioner Kim Henares. Commissioner?
Yeah. Actually, gusto ko umpisahan kung paano ko nakilala si PNoy. No? Before September 2009, hindi ko siya talaga kilala personally. At kilala ko lang siya as a congressman, senator, and the son of former President Cory Aquino. Noong September 2009, nung inimbitahan niya ako na mag-join sa campaign niya as the head of the Secretariat for the Policy Unit. Yung trabaho ng Policy Unit, kailangan kausapin namin lahat ng sektor, no? Sa bawat, I think the lineup is go through all the department of the government, no? And find out what is the situation, ano yung problema, at pagkatapos doon, kausapin yung bawat sektor dun sa department na yan, kung ano sa tingin, ano yung hinaing nila, ano yung gusto nilang solusyon. No? So this is the task given to the policy unit. At based on that, we compiled everything and pinisent namin kay then candidate PNoy. No? From there, doon lumabas yung social contract niya. No? At doon rin na dun sa pagtatabaho namin with him, makikita niyo na hindi siya naniniwala sa shortcut. Naniniwala siya na kung may problema, dapat pagtrabahuin, hanapin ano ba yung problema, ano ba yung tamang solusyon. At dapat ang solusyon is yung sustainable, no? At talagang problem solving. Dito nakita ko noon kasi remember yung sa campaign niya, one statement na tumatak aside from kung walang korap, walang mahirap is no new tax and no tax increase. At that time, dahil tinitingnan namin yung nakita namin na pag okay yung collection ng revenue at okay yung disbursement, walang corruption, hindi nyo naman kailangan talaga mag-increase ng tax o mag-impose ng new tax, which is contra to what people were thinking kasi at that time i-inherit niya yung office na walang pera. So natural tendency is dapat mag-impose tayo ng fees. No? Yung kasing remedy na tinignan namin is kailangan pagtrabahuan. Hindi yan ho immediate gratification. So makikita nyo na talagang hindi siya takot magtrabaho as long as tama ho yung ginagawa niya. Yung other things na nakita ko nung nasa search committee kami, hindi ho siya takot mag-appoint ng tao na hindi niya kilala. Case in point ho, naghahanap kami ng Secretary of Justice at that time. Walang kailangan ho somebody who has stature, no? So we suggested si Secretary Laila de Lima. Hindi ho, in fact, wala sa amin may alam ng telephone number niya. Naghanap pa kami, no? Tinawagan namin siya at tinanong namin kung interesado ba siya. Pwede pa niyang bigay sa amin yung CV niya. At yun ho, pinadala namin kay PNoy. And you can see na the way he choose or he decide on things, it's objective. Contrary to what people said na kaibigan, kabarilan, kamag-anak. No? First, kasi contrary to people's belief na matagal na kami magkilala, hindi kami magkakilala. In fact, nagkakilala lang kami September 2009. Yung kabarilan naman ho, kaya lang naman ako napasok sa barilan is kasi tinuruan ko niya ako. But before that, hindi ako marunong magbaril. No? In fact, siya yung nagturo sa akin. So, yung mga anecdote ko naman tungkol sa baril is that, kasi ako lang ho yung babae dun sa grupo. Dito ho nyo makikita yung old school values ni PNoy. No? Like, kung kakain na kami, hindi ho makakakain lahat na tao unless uumpisan ko. Kasi ako, dapat ladies first round. Tapos kung every time we go shooting, siyempre pagkatapos nung kakain kami sa labas. Siyempre kung minsan nahiya ako kasi siya yung parating nagbabayad para sa lahat na tao. No? Then I want to pay one on occasion. Ang sagot niya sa akin, hindi pwede kasi sabi ng tatay niya, hindi raw pwede magpa-blowout sa babae. So sabi niya, mamayang gabi, baka batukan daw siya ng tatay niya. Bakit daw siya nagpa-blowout sa isang babae? No? So yun yung makikita nyo na yung old school value, yung gentlemanliness niya. No? So yung second na yung tungkol sa usually pag ini-introduce niya rin ako sa mga tao, no? Sasabihin niya sa akin, sa mga tao, this is the most feared person in the Philippines. Yung ganun niya, he'll tease me, no? And then he'll ask me kung pwede niya ba raw ikwento yung kwento tungkol sa isang party ng birthday ng isang celebrity. Sabi ko, sige ho. Yung parati niyang kinakwento is nag-attend raw ako ng birthday party ng isang celebrity. Nung nalaman raw ng mga inimbitang celebrity doon, lahat raw sila nag-alisan ng jewelry. Tapos lahat raw yung mga signature bag raw nila, lahat nilagay raw sa restroom para hindi ko raw makita. Although parati kong sinasabi kay sir na hindi ko naman naramdaman yun. So, but those are the stories he liked to tell people. No? Whenever we're in the shooting range and he meets new people and he will introduce me to them. How do I see his integrity? No? You will see his integrity by the things he did not do. Ano ibig ko sabihin, no? Usually, maski ngayon naman, tanungin mo lahat sa mga tao sa BIR, maski sa government offices, no? One of the things that's normal is yung presidente tatawag sa kanila. Sasabihin sa kanila, ipwesto mo itong tao na ito kung saan opisina. Yun ho, hindi ever na ginawa ko ni PNoy. No? O kaya, naririnig nyo, common rin ito with other president na tatawag na may problema si ganito, pwede mo bang anuhin? That he never did during when I was commissioner. No? So doon mo makikita yung integridad niya. No? So basically, yun mamimiss ko sa kanya at hopefully, sana lahat tayo may natutuhan leksyon sa kanya, no, na pwede natin isabuhay sa buhay natin. Yun lang po.
Thank you very much po, Commissioner Kim Henares. Thank you also for sharing how the former president made his decisions, his appointments, not based on kakilala, not based on palakasan, but based on competence. Maraming salamat po. Ang susunod naman po nating mag-share ay walang iba kundi si Social Secretary Susan Reyes. Thank you po.
Hello, good morning. I'm not really used to this, so I just wrote and I'll just sort of read it. Anyway, by now, everybody knows how truly simple PNoy was. So I think, and because of that simplicity, I am surmising that this is the reason he left the choice of his social secretary to his sisters. Because as Kim said, we really didn't know each other. I mean, we were really at best just acquaintances. And yet he still put his complete trust in me to do everything that my office needed to do for him, like plan all his events, big or small, sometimes intimate parties or dinners, choose all his presidential gifts that he will bring to his state visits or what we will give to those who come over, Christmas gifts, birthday gifts that were necessary for him to give, things like of that nature, flowers, wreaths, stationery, etc. As detailed as he was with his cabinet and speechwriters, which we have read and heard so many times since he passed away, he really almost left me alone to do my job. I suppose this was because he was a bachelor who had no pretensions whatsoever about hosting social events. And with the serious problems and issues he had to tackle every day, he couldn't and really shouldn't have been bothered with things of this nature. Yet many times at the spur of the moment, while hosting a state leader, he would have requests relayed to me while we were still at it, all born out of his graciousness as a host. For example, there was that state lunch. I cannot remember anymore who the state leader was, but while having dessert and in the middle of an abbreviated cultural presentation, he had his assistant, ASEC June Delantar, run to me and say, "Uy, bumili ka daw ng CDs ni Gary Valenciano." Kasi Gary Valenciano was performing at the time. And I said, okay, which CDs? All. Sabi ko, all? You know? So I said, okay, but be sure it's in his plane, the plane of the guest, the state leader, in an hour because he's departing by then. This is the kind of graciousness, PNoy, you know, that's the way he is. So his favorite stress reliever after each event was to ask us to join him in singing. And this became something we all looked forward to as well, because this was where we saw him and where he appeared to be at his most relaxed. He didn't drink, not a single drop of alcohol, but he knew that some of us enjoyed our wine or whiskey or vodka. And in fact, he would tease some of us and call us as the Malacanang Alcoholics Anonymous Gang. And he would toast us with his Coke. He totally enjoyed us, watching us get happy and sing our heart out, even if we were out of tune. I can still, up to this date, see the smile on his face while watching us. And this is not just us, the staff, but this will include the caterers like Margarita Flores, the producers of the show, etc. Yet, yes, food was his love language. And in his graciousness, he wanted everyone who set foot within the palace to be fed. For example, for the wake of Secretary Jessie Robredo, which was held at the Kalayaan Hall of Malacanang, his specific instruction to me was to make sure there was food for all, VIP or not, and most especially for those who had to line up outside to get in. During the times when I joined his party outside the palace, for whatever reason, there was always a meal to cap the day before we went our respective ways. This was his way of showing us his appreciation and gratitude. And mind you, this was always at his own private expense and never charged to his office's account. PNoy was so thoughtful and generous. He never failed to give us personal Christmas and birthday gifts. And this on top of the official gifts, which the social office would distribute during Christmas. The waiters and household staff were also gifted something during Christmas from him. Lagi siyang may inaabot sa kanila kahit na maliit na bagay lang. You know, they may have been simple tokens of his appreciation of their service, but still they were very much appreciated by them because they knew and they could feel the spirit with which this was given to them. He was president, and yet when you text him, he always responded. One time, somebody sent him a text saying, "Thank you for the beautiful flowers you sent." He replied, not just with a, "You're welcome," dinagdag pa niya, "and happy birthday, hope you had a good day." Not realizing that it was a condolence wreath which he was being thanked for. It is hilarious now, but at the time, it was very embarrassing and almost mortifying. And so after that incident, we had to add another layer to the process of our daily functions, and we started submitting to him a daily list of the wreaths we were sending to the funerals or wakes for the dead and flowers for those who were still alive. The one trait which I really appreciated about him was his innate polite ability to say thank you to everyone, to anyone, big or small. I will never forget that big night of the APEC in 2015, which the Philippines hosted. After the 21 heads of state and some spouses of the participating economic countries had finally left, he looked for me. He had me called and found, especially just for him to tell me, "Well done." He shook my hands, congratulated me, and said a big thank you. I swear that small and simple gesture from him completely wiped away my exhaustion. His critics have called him many unsavory names, which I will not repeat here, but to me, he was a selfless and self-effacing leader who did his utmost best as president of this country. No frills, no wang-wang, no corruption, no drama, just hard work, marked with decency, elegance, truth, integrity, and honesty. At the onset of my appointment, I told myself I would just do this for only 2 or 3 years, but I stayed on with him throughout his term because he was truly an inspiration to watch and a joy to work for. I really feel blessed to have gotten to know him well after 6 years, and I will forever be grateful to President Benigno S. Aquino III for allowing me the opportunity to serve with him because it was really such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much po, Social Secretary Susan Reyes. Thank you for sharing with us how PNoy was hands-on in handling his social affairs, particularly po yung pagsabi ng thank you or salamat. Napakamahalaga po nun sa atin. Next po, si Yusek Abigail Valte. Maraming salamat po.
Hi everyone, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. So, allow me to read and I can share a few more stories later as we go on. So, it's been 42 days since PNoy passed, and the days since have paved the way for a remembrance of his brand of governance, marked by transparency, governed by accountability, with the welfare of Filipinos as his priority. He had a certain level of discomfort about claiming his own achievements. He always felt, and I think rightly so, that the achievements should speak for themselves. I'm happy to see now that there are so many people taking up the cudgels for him, and I'd like to thank the conveners of 1SAMBAYAN for this opportunity to talk about Sir. You know, he shied away from the spotlight after he stepped down. So choosing to emerge only when, in his view, what he had to say would enrich public discourse. After all, he was among a handful of people who knew and lived through the burden of carrying an entire nation on his shoulders, and was the last person who wanted to see the country fail. His battle with diabetes was typical PNoy. He grilled his doctors the same way he grilled his cabinet on policies and programs. I remember one of the times that he was in the hospital and then he had me called, and then I was surprised to walk into his room where his doctors were all present. And then he introduced me and he said, "Oh, you have to explain to Abby what's happening." And I found it very reminiscent of a cabinet meeting because, PNoy engaged him in discussions. He sought to clarify one particular point. He asked about every test result, every protein finding, all of it. He dissected every step of his treatment. That was just the way he was, within view of the public and away from the public eye. One of the things I will always remember about him is how he had so much respect for our public institutions. I remember that I went with him once to the DOJ to subscribe to his sinumpaang salaysay for one of the cases that was filed after his term, and then second to the COMELEC, again to do the same thing for electioneering or something of that sort. I fail to remember accurately now. But he showed up on time, and both times the people at DOJ and COMELEC were very surprised to see him there. And he came early. He sat in the visitor's chair to wait for the officer to administer the oath. I think the people there were more embarrassed that he arrived on time, that he just waited like anybody else. And I remember thinking we were all cramped into a small room. And he could sense their discomfort, that they were very, "Sir, pasensya na, magulo yung office, pasensya na." And he just said, "It's okay lang po, wag po kayong mag-abala." And siguro it was a small room, really. Parang 10 people inside that room would be standing in sin. And I think, again, they were more uncomfortable that he was just actually there waiting for them. And I remember in one of the petitioners, well, not one, but a lot of the petitioners also went to face him, and he did not back down. Parang, okay, maliit yung kwarto, tuhod sa tuhod tayo dito, pwede natin pag-usapan kung ano yung mga sinasabi niyo. So, he was not, doon ko na-sense yung tapang niya, kasi whether Senado, Sandigan Bayan, dadating yan. Hindi niya yan aatrasan. And, as he could have thrown his weight around as a former president. But, my colleagues here will all attest na hindi niya kasi gawain. So, as one of the many young people who entered public service during his administration, Sir set the example of how we should serve our people, whatever your job was. Whether you were a researcher, a writer, a graphic designer, an IT person, an executive assistant, this was how you serve them. With all your talent, with all your skill, with all your heart, and to never ever shortchange them. Our primary duty was to serve, and we tried our best to do this, as he did for the entire 6 years of his presidency. Ang biruan nga namin dyan, character building yan. Kapag tinatanong ka ni Sir, kapag meron siyang mga tanong na hindi mo masagot or meron kang pagkakamali, tapos kailangan ka niyang sabunin. Ang tawag namin dyan, character building. And it's true. It was a private joke back then, but everybody who served with him realized that he all made us better public servants, better professionals with the way that he set the example for us. And, beyond his passing, I am certain that his legacy will remain indelibly in the hearts and minds of those of us who served with him, especially the women staffers and the women in his cabinet whom he always treated as equal hearts and equally able public servants.
Okay, thank you very much po, Yusek Valte. Thank you also for sharing how PNoy showed the Filipino people and his cabinet members how to serve the people by giving our all, by giving our talents for the common good. Maraming salamat po sa ating mga conveners at mga panelists ngayong araw. Meron po tayong dalawang conveners ng Isang Bayan ngayon, si Justice Conchita Carpio Morales at si Secretary Ging Veles. At ang tatlo naman po sa kanila, sa ating panelists, ay ating invited guests, former secretaries or cabinet members po ni Pangulong Aquino, si Yusek Abigail Valte, si Commissioner Kim Henares, at si Social Secretary Susan Reyes. Bukas na po ang ating tapatan para sa mga katanungan mula sa ating mga kapatid sa media. Pero bago po natin simulan ng open forum, konting paalaala lang po ng ating mga house rules. Para po sa mga katanungan, dalawang paraan po. Raise hand at hintayin pong tawagin ang inyong pangalan o isulat ang inyong mga katanungan sa chat box ng Zoom. Okay po? At ang unang magtatanong po ay, meron na po kaming na-receive pa na tanong. Babasahin ko lamang po habang nagsasalita pa po ang ating mga panelists at mga conveners, meron na po kaming buena manong tanong. At ito po ay from Facebook Messenger ng ating Isang Bayan account. At ito po ay tanong para kay Justice Conchita Carpio Morales. Ayan po ma'am, buena manong tanong po sa inyo. Justice Morales, ito po ang iyong tanong. Anong campaign ni PNoy on curtailing corruption during your time as ombudsman to clean the government bureaucracy? Anong campaign ni PNoy on curtailing corruption during your time as ombudsman to clean the government bureaucracy? May follow-up po ito, mamaya ko na lang po babasahin. Thank you po.
Well, the president himself was an example. He believed in leadership by example. So he gave me a free hand to go after the corrupt. And on my part, I saw to it that if a complaint was filed, we had to validate the facts or quote facts that were furnished the office of the ombudsman before we proceeded to considering the case for preliminary investigation. In other words, we had to conduct fact-checking before we proceeded to the preliminary investigation proper. So the president's marching order was that be independent, go after the corrupt, if necessary, put them to jail.
Okay, meron po tayong follow-up question po. Ito po yon. Noong panahon po ni PNoy, madami ang nakulong sa korupsyon. Tulad po ng sinasabi po ninyo, no? Babanggitin ko lamang po yung mga nakulong due to corruption, si GMA, si Senator Enrile, si Senator Bong Revilla at si Senator Jinggoy Estrada. Fast forward po sa panahon ngayon ni Pangulong Duterte, napalaya sila at nakabalik na sa politika. What went wrong daw po, Ombudsman Morales? What went wrong?
As far as as far as GMA is concerned, the Sandigan Bayan denied her demurrer to evidence, which means after the prosecution rested its case, sabi ni defense ni GMA, mahina yung present ni prosecution. So dapat ibasura na yung kaso. Anong ginawa ng Sandigan Bayan? They denied GMA's demurrer to evidence. Okay? So, kung na-deny yung demurrer to evidence, tuloy ang bista. It would have been the time or opportunity for GMA to present evidence. In other words, to counter-argue the presence of evidence presented by the prosecution that showed that she was prima facie guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Kaya ang ginawa nga ng Sandigan, as I said earlier, dininay nila yung demurrer to evidence. What did the defense do? Umakyat sila sa Supreme Court. Anong sabi ng Supreme Court? Maliraw yung pag-deny ng Sandigan Bayan, yung demurrer to evidence. So ang nangyari, nabasura yung kaso ni GMA. So we did everything. The prosecution of the Office of the Ombudsman did everything. The Sandigan Bayan, from my point of view, rightfully denied the dismissal or denial of the demurrer evidence. Pero anong magagawa natin? Iba naman ang tingin ng Supreme Court. And ang Supreme Court is supposed to be the final arbiter of cases.
Thank you very much po. Thank you very much po, Ombudsman.
Now, as far as Enrile is concerned, hindi pa tapos yung bista sa kanya. Hindi pa siya napalaya. Napalaya in the sense that he was allowed by the Supreme Court again to go scot-free in the sense that he would not be detained because ang tingin ng Supreme Court for humanitarian reasons daw at saka in any event, given his age, as if I'm not old also, he would not be a flight risk. So, pinalabas si Enrile on the ground of humanitarian reasons, matanda na raw siya and all that. But parenthetically, even Enrile did not ask for release from jail because of infirmity or of old age. He used those grounds to be allowed to be confined in a hospital. Okay? Now, as far as Bong Revilla is concerned, the prosecution, the ombudsman finds probable cause and files cases sa Sandigan Bayan. Ang Sandigan Bayan ang nagbibista. So, siguro ang tingin ng mga justices ng Sandigan Bayan, mahinang evidence ng prosecution. But, let me add, this was not a unanimous decision. Out of 5 justices, 2 came up with a very potent dissenting opinion. Now, as far as Jingo is concerned, hindi pa tapos ang kaso niya. But again, he was given the opportunity to file a bail and that's it. He's still scot-free, but hindi pa nga tapos yung bista. Thank you.
Ayan po, maraming salamat. Sinagot po ni Ombudsman Morales ang mga katanungan sa lahat po ng mga involved ng mga politicians at leaders po natin. Okay, ang susunod pong magtatanong ay si Miss Mara Cepeda from Rappler. Mara?
So, can you hear me properly po?
Opo.
Alright, okay, great. I would like to address this to our conveners of 1SAMBAYAN. So much has been said about the legacy of good governance that PNoy has left behind. And we know that you are currently vetting whoever will be the presidential candidate that the coalition will be endorsing. Are the 1SAMBAYAN conveners hoping that the presidential bet that you will be supporting will continue and build on the legacy of PNoy? And what specific qualities are you looking for so that this legacy of good governance and transparency and integrity will be continued or returned?
So we have 2 Isambayan conveners po this morning, no? So we have Justice Morales and Secretary Ging Deles. Okay. Maybe we can allow them both to answer the question, no? So let's start with Justice Morales to be followed by Secretary Ging Deles. Thank you.
Well, there are traits of PNoy that we want to adopt for purposes of determining who will be endorsed by the Sambayan. For example, integrity, character. Those are very important traits. Competence, that's also very important. Pero competence without integrity is more dangerous than integrity without competence. So kailangan i-balance natin yung mga traits na yan. Of course, winnability, the likelihood of the chosen one to go out and campaign for the platform that Isambayan adopts and campaign in earnest para naman hindi na sayang yung mga tumutulong sa kanya. Ging?
Yes, definitely yun yung inaasahan. I think yun yung kampanya talaga na maibalik ang tapat na pamamahala. Which means anong mga parte yan, yung transparency, Hindi dapat malabo, dapat pwede kang magtanong, dapat pwede mong singilin yung mga nakaupo doon sa ginagawa nila. Yung accountability about public funds. Hanggang ngayon, yung tinatanong na ano bang nangyari sa COVID funds, ano bang nangyari sa inutang. In an accountable government, automatic yan eh. Dapat yan ay ilalabas eh. At importante yan dahil importante na ang kaban ng bayan ay ginagastos para sa kinakailangan ng bayan. At kung may malaki kang kinakailangan na ganito, dapat nakikita na yung binabayad ng mga buwis doon nagpupunta. So yung pagrespeto sa mga institusyon, hindi sundalo ko, hindi Supreme Court ko, hindi kongreso ko. Dahil yung mga institusyon na nandun ay yung checks and balance na kailangan ngang mangyari. At ang lahat nagsisilbi sa mga mamamayan, pinapabuti ang kalagay para sa kinabubuti ng bayan. Ay yun yung mga kailangan at palagay ko yun yung hinahanap ngayon na lalo-lalo na nasa pinakamalalim pinakamataas na klaseng krisis. At hindi mo alam kung saan ka tatakbo at hindi mo alam kung sinong pananagutin mo. Sa akin minimum sa palagay ko yun yung hinahanap na minimum ay yung inuluklok. Dapat sumagot, dapat maging accountable. Doon sa paghawak ng pondo at paano ginamit ng mga institusyon at pagkakaroon ng mga plano para matugunan ang suliranin ng bayan.
Alright. I have one more question. Medyo nilipat lang po ako ng onte sa politics. Again, this is directed to our conveners of the Sambayan. Last week, nagkaroon ng social media posts, one of your nominees, ex-Senator Antonio Trillanes, and he was expressing his opposition to the efforts of Vice President Leni Robredo to sit down with the likes of Senator Lacson and Senator Gordon. And he's saying that by talking to these politicians, VP Leni is crossing a red line because Isambayan is also, of course, building a big tent, a big coalition for the opposition in 2022. I'm wondering where the conveners stand on the view of ex-Senator Trillanes against these exploratory talks of the Vice President with other potential candidates. Do you share that he's crossing the red line, or you agree with the position of the VP's camp that it's really just part of coalition building?
Okay. Mara, we have two conveners as panelists, but we also have another one pala. Si Father Albert Alejo is also with us. So he joined us in the opening prayer. So your questions for the conveners may also be answered by Father Albert. So maybe this question is for Father Albert. Father Bert.
Yes, please.
Ngumingiti si Mara. Anyway, sa totoo lang, hindi pa namin napag-usapan. So, mahirap na sabihin ko kung ano yung posisyon. Pero ang maganda nito, sinuggest din ng iba, na mabuti pa si VP Leni humarap na doon sa Isambayan conveners para marinig din natin yung kanyang interpretation sa mga ginagawa niya, ano ba talagang ginagawa. So, siguro within this week or early next week, magkakaroon ng panahon si VP Leni na humarap sa Isambayan, ang conveners group, at doon namin siguro mabubuo yung aming interpretasyon sa mga nangyayaring pag-uusap nila o hindi nila pag-uusap.
Well, Father Bert, you're saying dapat humarap na si VP Leni. So are you saying even before that, hindi pa rin yung nakakausap si VP Leni?
Hindi,
or
kasi
just
noon,
regarding this issue?
Hindi pa namin napag-usapan sa conveners yung ganitong exchange. Si VP Leni naman, umaharap noon sa isang maliit na interview team. Ang suggestion nga natin ngayon ay humarap na si VP Leni sa buong conveners group na 20 plus na members. At doon siguro mas magandang mahinog yung aming pagtingin sa nangyayaring pag-uusap.
How about po si Senator Trillanes? Nakausap na po ba siya ng conveners regarding his concerns?
Kasama sa proseso na na nag-present na siya ng kanyang mga platform of government.
Pero hindi na pag-usapan itong
Pero
pa po.
hindi pa yan
pa
napag-usapan. Oo. Kasi noon pa nauna yung pag-present ni ni Senator Trillanes sa buong conveners group.
Alright.
Bahagi naman yan ng proseso.
Alright. So Father Bert, baka you can also answer na in my earlier question about how you hope your Isambayan's presidential bet would continue the legacy of the president, former President Aquino.
Okay, marami nang nasabi, no? Pero siguro ang isang idadagdag ko lang, yung pagiging disente. Yung bang handa tayong lumaban, mag-criticize, pero wag naman yung bastos. Hindi natin kailangan yon. Hindi natin kailangan ang guro sa eskwelahan na bastos, nagbumura. Lalong-lalong hindi natin kailangan ang isang leader na pambansa na hindi tugma sa mga Filipino values ang mga ikinikilos at yung pananalita. At ako bilang Makata, sensitibo talaga ako sa salita. Hindi ko gusto at hindi ko pa pinapayagan na sasabihin salita lang. Kapag ang lipunan ay walang paggalang sa salita, paano na yung mga lagda, mga pirma? Pag walang paggalang sa mga pirma, paano na yung mga kontrata? At kapag walang paggalang sa salita, malamang wala rin paggalang sa numero. Kaya nga magkakaloko-loko yung mga finances. So sana, ang hahanapin nating leader ay hindi yung sisira sa mga Filipino values. At isa na dyan yung paggalang sa tamang salita kasi nakasalalay din dyan yung paggalang sa mga konsepto ng tama at mali.
Thank you so much, Father Bert. Thank you
Salamat,
po.
Mara.
Okay, thank you. Yung next question po natin kay Yusek Valte from a Facebook user, no? Yusek Valte, what would you say are the biggest accomplishments of the PNoy administration being reaped by the present administration or being enjoyed by the people until now? Like in terms of infrastructure, education, peace and order, tourism, and health. Whatever comes to mind daw po. So ano daw po yung mga naririp pa ng mga tao ngayon na nagmula pa kay PNoy? Maraming salamat po.
Medyo mahaba yung sagot dyan sa tanong na yan kasi medyo marami talaga, lalo kung i-breakdown natin per sector. Pero subukan kong itahi, no, Attorney JP. Sa akin yung hanggang ngayon nararamdaman pa rin natin is yung ginawang investment ng administrasyon ni PNoy doon sa pamilyang Pilipino. Doon mo nakita 'di ba? Meron tayong 4Ps na support. Tinutukan niya yung pag-improve ng education through K-12 and through catching up yung backlog sa classrooms na inabutan natin. Actually, at end of term, his administration was able to build 185,000 classrooms. That's, if you think about it, that's parang 85 classrooms per day ang nagawa. So, ang point niya is, si PNoy kasi hindi siya pang short-term wins. Ang inaalagaan niya is, ano ba yung pangmatagalan? Ano yung long-term victories na kailangan nating gawin? So, ang paniniwala niya, kailangan mo mag-invest in the Filipino families. Diba? You have to make sure that you give them provisions for their health at nakita natin yan dun sa pagpapalakas ng PhilHealth. Kailangan mong magbigyan sila ng ayuda para matulungang yung pang-araw-araw ng kanilang pamilya. Kailangang makapag-aral ang mga bata. Very important yan sa kanya. At sa pag-aaral nila, kailangan bigyan natin sila ng capability. Kailangan ng classrooms, ng libro, ng upuan. Parang kung iisipin mo, very basic. But PNoy was about giving everybody the same start. Hindi porket mayaman, hindi porket mahirap. Ang gusto niya, lahat magkakaroon ng toolkit para makagaang at makaangat sa buhay. And his administration was all about that, long-term gains. Ma'am Ging mentioned it, it's investing in the peace process because when there is peace, development can come. Marami siya talagang, hindi kasi sexy yung mga ginustong gawin ni PNoy eh. Parang very long-term yung inisip niya. And I think until now, we see the benefits of that, especially in Mindanao. Yung binanggit ni Sec Ging kanina, yung pagbuo ng farm, diba? Ilang pamilya yung kaya ng mamuhay ng mapayapa dahil nagkaroon na tayo ng way forward doon sa 17 years of conflict in that area. So there's so many things. But on top of mind, he really believed in investing in the Filipino family.
Thank you very much po, Yusek Valte. Ang susunod naman pong magtatanong ay isa sa mga members ng media po natin ngayon, no? So si Miss Sandra Aguinaldo from GMA7. Sandra?
Hello, sir.
Hello po.
Sa participants po natin, siguro po, ang itanong ko lang po yung, do you think there was lack of appreciation for PNoy? At sa tingin nyo po ba, saan po nagmumula yung kakulangan na yon, no, sa pag-appreciate maari doon sa mga nagawa niya? Do you think there was a lack of siguro communication or yung pag-relay sa tao ng mga nagawa po niya during and after his term?
Sino po ang pwedeng sumagot po nun? Mukhang open question naman po yun. Commissioner Kim, kayo na po sigurong pwedeng sumagot nun. Thank you po.
Well, I think ang isang kakulangan, kasi tayong Pilipino, di ba? Sorry. Tayong Pilipino, di ba, tinuturuan tayo na huwag tayong masyadong mayabang. No? So, siguro sa time ni PNoy, ang kakulangan rin is yung dahil sa humility na gusto niyang i-exercise, no? Hindi ho na ilalabas ho kung ano yung nagawa niya, no? Which is, tingin ko, yun yung kakulangan na ginawa ng administrasyon, no? Na ipalabas. Total, hindi naman yan, para sa akin, yan achievement na yan is not just an achievement of the president, but it's an achievement of a whole nation, no? So we should have presented it, and we should have told people what has happened, what's going on, no? So in that sense, that's one lesson probably the next good president should learn, no? Not only is it enough that you should be a good president, but people should know that what kind of goodness it is, so that people can strive to achieve that goodness, no? Kasi kung hindi nila alam ano yung standard ng goodness, syempre hindi naman nila isa sa puso yun. So tingin ko yun ho yung kakulangan kung bakit ho siya hindi na-appreciate. Ngayon lang ho na wala na siya, kaya nakakapagsalita na. In fact, ang nagsasalita ibang tao, hindi naman siya. So habang buhay siya, hindi ho siya, ayaw niya na sinasabi niya kung anong magandang ginawa niya. Pero siguro, yun siguro kulang rin, no? Especially kasi we're in a very social media age, no? Saka perception is very important. So yun ho yung tingin kong bakit hindi siya na-appreciate at bakit hindi ho yun ang hinanap ng tao yun after his term. Or yun kung bakit hindi ho yan yung hinanap ng tao dun sa iboboto nilang presidente kasunod niya.
Thank you po, Commissioner Kim. Maybe Yusek Valte can also answer the same question po.
Yes, coming off from that, very early on, si PNoy, if you remember, issued I think an AO, if I'm not mistaken, to all government agencies not to put his name or his face on any project boards or tarpaulins. So wala siyang mukha. Ayaw niya ng ganun. The second part that I think most people did not know about is that he also prohibited government agencies from running public advertisements with his name and his face. Because his point was, the money that you spend buying those ads will be better put in programs that will directly benefit Filipinos. Tama yung sinabi ni Ma'am Kim kanina, hindi kasi mahilig magbuhat ng sariling bangko si PNoy. To him, accomplishing the project was the more important part of it, and he doesn't do things kasi, he did not do things for vanity, para masabing siya yung gumawa. And in fact, if you look at his programs, a lot of it are continuations from previous administrations. Hindi siya self-centered kasi that way. Na just because it was started in the previous or the one before that, hindi niya gagawin. He wasn't that kind of person. And to a certain extent, that also limited very much what people around him could do. Kasi anong gagawin mo kung ayaw ng presidenteng lumabas at ipagyabang yung mga ginagawa niya, siya ang principal, diba? So again, he thought that government money and government resources could be better directed to projects that would actually benefit Filipinos and not just for his own surveys. But actually, if you go back, he had very good survey ratings during his presidency. That's something that we should not forget. And I think it was just, we really just dealt with a different kind of propaganda when he stepped down from office. There was really a concentrated effort to demonize the former president. And I think people have consciously pushed back against that particular machinery now.
Thank you very much po, Yusek Valten. Now, our next question po is addressed to Social Secretary Susan Reyes. Ito po yung tanong from Facebook user. What do you think is PNoy's best character as a boss compared to other bosses you've had, Sec Susan? PNoy's best character as a boss compared to other bosses you've had. Thank you po.
For me, no, he was so, even if he was president, parang he did not do anything to try to intimidate anyone. He was always so kind. Hindi ba siya yung laging, parang hindi siya, how do I say this? He was so self-effacing. He doesn't really make it clear to you, hey, I'm the boss. Parang hindi ganon, Not at least for me. To me, he was always so nice to me. I don't know. I can't explain it. But yeah, at saka though I was intimidated by his office, he himself as a person wasn't intimidating. So that's really what I liked about him, because I used to work for somebody who was so intimidating because he was who he was, and because she was the CEO, etc., the founder. So talagang terrorized ako noon. With Noy, even if he was president of the Philippines, I didn't feel terrorized by him at all. I didn't, hindi siya ganon, not at all. He was really very nice and very well-mannered and very well-behaved. Kaya nga, every little thing lang, mag-text ka, he'll text you back. You do something nice, he'll say thank you. He'll say good morning. Hindi siya talagang, ang bait niya talaga. He is so, kumbaga, well-mannered, well-bred, and well-behaved. Hindi siya bastos at all. Oh my God, not at all. Yeah, mabait siya talaga. Yeah.
Maraming salamat po. Meron follow-up question din po. Meron po bang mga protocols daw po si PNoy kapag may mga bisitang mga dignitaries or ambassadors? Meron po ba kayong experience or story na kung saan kanyang in-insist daw po ang kanyang mga protocol? Paano niyo po ba in-handle po yan? Maraming salamat po.
Hindi siya ganyan eh. So he will leave the protocol. That's the thing about Sir, He knows, I think he pays attention to what is in his capacity to pay attention to, like yung mga various government agencies, yung kay Exec Ging, yung peace process, yung mga financing, ganyan. But when it comes to social events and protocol, yung protocol na yan, he leaves it to our protocol officer. Meron yung protocol office in Malacanang. Iniiwan na lang niya doon sa protocol officers. And then, he puts his trust in them. Although, sometimes once in a while, like, hindi siya nakikialam, pero once in a while, halimbawa, kung, like when President Obama came, medyo talagang tiningnan niya ng gusto yung guest list kasi ang dami-daming gusto magpa-imbita, hindi ba? Hindi naman lahat kakasya. So talagang yon, mga ganyan, tiningnan niya. Yung sa Pope, talagang tiningnan din niya yon. Sinigurado din niya na yung, this is the first time that he insisted na may kamag-anakan siyang pumunta at bisitahin. And this was his aunt who was dying at the time. This was Mrs. Chupaco, kapatid ni Tita Cory. Yun talagang he made sure na she's invited at kahit na papano makakapunta siya doon para maka-bless lang siya ng Pope. But otherwise, wala siyang, hindi siya ganyan. Iniiwan niya sa protocol office at sa aming office kung anong gagawin when it comes to those things.
Thank you very much po, Sec Reyes. Our next question naman po is addressed to Sec Deles from our Facebook account. What were PNoy's instructions, the do's and don'ts when you started the Bangsang Moro organic law efforts? Sec Ging.
Sorry.
Alright.
Okay na. Okay na.
Alright. Okay. Mga do's and don'ts daw po when you started your BOL efforts from
Actually,
PNoy.
yung presidential instructions niya was issued early in the term, within the first 100 days. Hindi later on. Ano yan, and it's very it's open, it's transparent. Nasama siya doon sa chapter on peace in the Philippine Development Plan. So klaro doon. Number 1, dapat constitutional. But recognizing the flexibilities within the Constitution. So alam niya, as the President, he is the main defender of the Constitution. Pero kinikilala naman that our Constitution has enough flexibilities that will allow negotiation. So yun yung number 1. Number 2, learn the lessons from the past. Dahil nga, napakahaba na itong prosesong ito, yung negotiation, 17 years, kung bibilangin mo yung sa with the MNLF, 1976 pa yung Tripoli Agreement, pero hindi pa rin nase-settle. Pag-aralan, ano na ba yung mga nangyari? We cannot do the same things wrong. We cannot do the same things and expect the same results, different results rather. So yun yung unang ginawa ng panel, was pinag-aralan talaga, including ano ba yung sinabi ng Supreme Court, ano ba yung nangyari sa MNLF peace agreement, ano ba yung laman ng mga past organic acts dahil meron na ngang autonomous region. Dapat pag-aralin yon, and it will always have to build on that and move forward. Pangatlo, which is related to that, it's a major lesson of the past, implement. We should not sign anything that we cannot implement. The other way of looking at that is implement everything that you sign. Huwag mong bobolahin. He in fact told me that once. No false promises. Is that honest when we were talking about yung gusto na ma-amend ang Constitution? Nasabi niya, alam, maging mahirap yan eh. Kasi pag binuksan mo ang Constitution, hindi lang naman yung sa autonomous region ang titignan. Lahat yan mabubungkal. At napakarami diyang social justice issues that we want to make sure are protected. So, sabi ko, pero sir, ang sinabi naman ng Supreme Court, pwedeng mag-amend ng Constitution, but it has to follow the process. So, and they will see, sabi ko, and they will see. The MILF will see why in the end, kung na baka hindi nga constitutional amendment ang kailangan, baka bagong batas. Tapos sabi niya sa akin, but Ging, is that honest? Don't lead them on that you are agreeing to something na hindi mo pala in your heart, mahihirapan tayo pumunta doon. Implement what you sign, which also means making sure number 1, that it's implementable, no? So hindi ito panel lang ang gumagawa. Everything that went into the agreements, dumaan yan doon sa mga concerned agencies. Ang daming meeting yan doon sa taxation, ikwekwento ni Kim. Ang hirap yan na abot yung formula para dyan. But number 2, dapat walang madedehadong iba, no? Dapat walang powers na mabibigay doon sa autonomous region na yung mga karatig probinsya niya, nenervyusin o mahihirapan. Or magkakaroon ng problema in the future. Okay lang ngayon, so tahimik, masaya lahat, pero mamaya naman magkakaroon ng problema. Kaya yung pag-iisip tungkol doon sa lahat ng provisions had to be, how will it affect yung out of the how will it affect the Bangsamoro, but how will it affect yung wala sa Bangsamoro? And how will it be 2 years from now, 3 years from now? Is that still a good formula? And finally, and this because this is what the Supreme Court said, consult, be as open as possible. Of course, there were times we had to keep things confidential in the but as soon as even before we signed anything, everything went through full consultations with the military, with the local governments. Never, sabi ng mga local governments at sabi ng military for the first time, yung peace panel, the peace negotiators went down to them and spoke to them about the issues, about the provisions and to work it out. The number of consultations that happened, both on the CAB and on the BOL, that is on record. Hindi dapat mangyari yung nangyari doon sa MOA AD. Na nabulaga na lang lahat, meron palang pipirmahan na ganyan, na never man nakausap yung mga nasa baba. So yun yung instructions niya, and siguro yun yung ano ko doon, nung una parang, okay, very common sense yung but the reality is, it meant a lot of hard work.
Okay, thank you very much po, Sec Ging. We have last 2 questions po addressed to Justice Morales. First po, unang tanong po from a Facebook user, ano pong gains o reforma noong panahon ni PNoy ang nawala when it comes to fighting corruption in government now? Ano pong gains o reforma noong panahon ni PNoy ang nawala when it comes to fighting corruption in government now? Yung isa po, babasahin ko na po later. Thank you po. Justice Morales? Okay.
I will concentrate on the gains in corruption. You recall that Transparency International Index during the time of PNoy, pataas ng pataas. Pero yung present administration, sorry to say, pababa ng pababa. But again, as I said before, even the president admitted that corruption is getting worse under his administration. Yun. That's the more important gain na nawala, which was present during the Aquino administration, but which is absent in the present administration. We can discuss this all day, but time does not permit us to enumerate all gains of the Aquino administration under our present time frame.
Okay po, and last question po, Ombudsman Morales, from Sandra Aguinaldo of GMA7. How does the efforts of VP Lenny to talk to other potential candidates affect Isang Bayan's efforts to unify the opposition? So how do the efforts of VP Lenny to talk to other potential candidates affect our own efforts, Isang Bayan's efforts to unify the opposition?
All right. In fact, I see Lenny's efforts to be talking to others who have already beamed their hope or their intention to run as very good, because I can see that she's trying to unify the opposition. In other words, like the Isang Bayan, Lenny, I think, wants to have one set of candidates to be fielded in the next elections. So that she is talking to Lacson and or Soto does not necessarily mean that she is already allying herself with them. She is, in fact, from my view, trying to get them to unite with one opposition candidate. So I'm sorry, Mr. Senator Trillanes, I do not think that by talking to Soto and to Lacson, Lenny is already waltzing with them. No, she is not, from my own point of view. She is trying, in fact, to have just against the president.
Ayan, medyo na-cut po. Medyo mahina po ang...
Oh.
Hello? Okay.
What happened?
Naputol
Hello?
po kayo. Opo, medyo naputol po kayo, Ombudsman Chick. You were saying po about...
Saan ako naputol?
Maybe you can repeat po what you said about the impression of Senator Trillanes.
Well, what I said was, I'm sorry, Mr. Senator Trillanes, that Lenny has been talking to Senators Lacson and Soto. Does not mean that she's already waltzing with them. In fact, the 1SAMBAYAN is happy about this development because it would synchronize with the plan of the 1SAMBAYAN to have just one set of candidates to go against the candidates of the president and his allies, many of whom, I'm referring to the allies, have already signified their intention to run for president and vice president. Okay?
Okay po. Ayan po.
Naputol ulit?
Okay na po. Narinig po namin kayo, Ombudsman Morales.
Okay.
Maraming salamat po sa ating mga panelists, sa ating mga conveners, sa pagsagot sa mga tanong ng ating mga kapatid mula sa media. Bago po magtapos tayo, ating pakinggan po muli sila, ang ating mga conveners at panelists for their parting message. So, in order po tayo mula kay Sec Ging, Yusek Valte, Commissioner Hinares, Social Secretary Susan Reyes, then Ombudsman Morales. Sec Ging, kayo po muna. Thank you.
Ang hiningi sa atin kung ano yung lessons na natutunan, no? Siguro, well, nabanggit ko naman yung mga parameters niya for the peace process. Sa akin, those were very important lessons about governance. Na nako-connect talaga paano ka namumuno, kung ano yung resulta. Dapat walang pangakong hindi mo, you don't really mean. Pero siguro yung talagang napaloob sa akin, yung ibig sabihin ng public service as a public trust. Kung pumasok ka dito, tumanggap ka ng appointment, tumanggap ka ng trabaho, being in a public office, trust yun, hindi yan privilege, hindi yan entitlement. And you show up every time. You put things on hold, you put other things on hold. Dahil yun ang ibig sabihin nito, when you took your oath of office, that you would do your obligation. You would think of the people. You would put the people and the country first and foremost. And don't lead them on. Don't make false promises. If it's a public trust, then you have to be accountable, be able to explain everything that you do, and you should be open to criticism and all of that. And siguro yung pinakaano dito, how important the peace process was, no? Na if you will, na more than 10 years na ngayon, walang bakbakan, na nakapasok ang mga bata, na tumubo. They were able to grow the fields again and all of that. So that when and this is what you go into government for, this is what you go into public office for, because there is a dream that you commit to, and you treat that as a public trust.
Okay. Thank you very much po, Sec Ging. Yusek Abby?
Ako, among the many things that PNoy taught me, you must have pride in your work. You must be willing to put your name and your face to your work. Kumbaga, lagi niya sinasabi, basta may pride ka in your work, kaya mong ipagtanggol yan kahit saan, lalo na sa Plaza Miranda. Pangalawa, there is no job too big or too small in government. Everybody is an individual contributor to how government can make the lives of Filipinos better. Pangatlo, and yung pinaka-importante, whatever it is that you do, if you are in government, laging tatandaan, hindi yan para sa'yo, pero para sa bayan.
Thank you very much po, Yusek Valte. Next po, Com Kim Henares.
Yeah, actually, ang gusto ko lang sabihin kasi parang naawa ko sa atin na hindi natin na-appreciate yung tao habang buhay siya. So, ang tingin ko the lesson learned is dapat hindi natin inaasa ang kinabukasan natin sa isang tao lamang na we're putting so much burden on him. Dapat noon, yung kinabukasan natin, lahat tayo dapat may ginagawa at hindi inaasa sa isang tao. No? Kasi nakikita natin na it put so much burden on him that I think it was inevitable. Kaya nangyari yun, no? Nagkasakit siya, kaya siya, di ba, parang yung lesson ni PNoy is that kung gusto natin umunlad ang bayan natin, dapat lahat tayo nakataya. At lahat tayo dapat tumutulong sa pinuno na bobotohin natin. No? So secondly, siguro dapat the leader we vote for is a reflection of our own integrity and our own competence. No? So yun yung tingin ko, bakit tayo nagkakaroon ng ganong leader, is siguro dapat una, tingnan natin sarili natin. Meron ba tayong integridad? Meron ba tayong pagmamahal sa bayan natin? No? Kasi kung wala, ulit lang tayo ng ulit, wala naman kung mangyayari. At sayang yung lahat na sakripisyo ni PNoy. At tingin ko, yun yung pinakamalungkot na mangyayari. No? Na nasa heaven siya, nakikita niya na wala naman tayong ginawa sa lahat ng sinakripisyo niya. So, I think our greatest accolade to him is to live his life the way, to live all those character and qualities in our own life. No? So that all these things can be sustained. Hindi yung cycle na after 6 years, iba na naman, balik na naman tayo 2 step back. No? So, kung ganyan ho ng ganyan, wala ho talagang mangyayari. Tsaka, siguro the other lessons we should learn, no matter how good a president is, kung lahat tayo hindi willing na ibig sabihin, alam nyo, sa isang problema, marami hong point of view. At the end of the day, meron hong isang tao dapat mag-desisyon. So maaring yung decision niya, hindi yung gusto nating solusyon. Pero siguro naman, dahil pinag-aralan niya, dapat tanggapin natin na yan yung solusyon na sa tingin niya and nararapat ngayon at suportahan natin. Kasi tingin ko yan ho yung kakulangan natin noong time ni PNoy. No? Na he did so many things, he decided responsibly, but because he gave us so much freedom, hindi, parang nag-away-away tayong lahat. No? So, kailangan rin ho, in a democracy, somebody has to give. Somebody has to make a decision and people has just to follow. Yun lang ho. Thank you.
Thank you so much po, Com Kim. Susan Reyes po, next.
Sa akin, simple lang. Kasi ito yung nakita ko sa kanya habang nagtatrabaho ko ng 6 na taon. Just always yung kanyang sense of humility. Nakakaano yun it was contagious, you know? Because I saw it all the time with him. Not so much in dealing with important people like cabinet or ganyan, but it's the way he dealt with the ordinary people, you know, like the waiters, the housekeeping staff in Malacanang. Ano siya, he was the same to everybody, whether you are a VIP or not. So that's the one thing talaga na nakita ko sa kanya and that I always reminded myself na kahit nandito ako sa Malacanang, kailangan I should always be humble and treat everybody equally. Then another thing talaga that I took seriously was his no wang-wang. It's not that talagang ayaw mo mag-igay kung ano ang ginagawa mo para sa bayan, or like in his case, para sa bayan. Ako naman, in a way, para din sa kanya. Tsaka nakikita ko din na, when it's election time, he doesn't skip the line, he goes behind the line. So, in my mind, kahit na may posisyon ako sa gobyerno, kahit halimbawa lang, pag nagbabakasyon ako paminsan-minsan pag Pasko, punong-puno ang airport ng tao, pwede ko naman gamitin ng konti, tatawagan ko siguro pwede ko tawagan nun si Bolet, sabihin, oy, tulungan mo naman ako. Pero hindi ko yun na rin ginagawa kasi naiisip ko, kung hindi ginagawa yun ng presidente, sino ako para gawin yon to break the line? You know what I mean? So wala talagang sense of entitlement. I think karamihan ng kilala ko, if not all, that I know well in his administration or in his office in Malacanang, in the office of the president, wala akong alam na umabuso ng kanilang posisyon. Dahil yon, kasi nga, yun ang nakikita namin kay Sir. Nakakahiya naman kung kami, we will, push our authority and then he doesn't, hindi ba? So, yan ang aking natutuhan talaga kay Sir. Yung kanyang sense of humility and simplicity, and hindi niya talaga ginagamit ang kanyang pangalan, ang kanyang powers to intimidate people into doing what he likes. He wasn't like that at all. So yun ang aking natutuhan sa kanya. Hanggang ngayon, iniisip-isip ko lagi yun.
Thank you very much po, Sec. Reyes. And last po, Justice Conchita Carpio Morales.
On viewing the body of PNoy minutes before he was cremated, I was absolutely convinced that the honor was mine in administering the oath of office to him, which honor was reinforced while I was serving under his term. For PNoy embodied the virtues of fidelity to rule of law and to justice, which he had envisioned and he did carry out for the people. Generosity of trust in me and to those who trusted most. Courage for upholding territorial integrity and national sovereignty. Compassion, including the value of sympathy and empathy, and integrity for not committing and tolerating any act of corruption. Mr. President, you left us without seeing the day when integrity is common stable. For your candle of hope for integrity is flickering. As they say, however, hope springs eternal. Quien sabe, a ready hand or a hand who was born but like a flower which blushes unseen is ready to provide the steady hand to control the flickering candle. Going back to the other virtues of the president, which had reinforced mine, I pray that they will be emulated by generations and generations to come. Descansar en paz, Señor Presidente. Sapay kumatanatal na ang aginana kayo, now that you are in the warm embrace of the Lord. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much po, Ombudsman Morales. At ayan po, atin na namang winawakasan ang isang serye ng Tapatan, Isang Bayan. Maraming salamat po sa mga kaibigan natin sa media na dumalo sa ating pagtitipon ngayong araw. Maraming salamat din po sa mga nagpadala ng mga tanong sa ating Facebook page. Next week po, mayroon na naman tayong Tapatan. Magsama-sama tayo muli sa susunod na Miyerkules, parehong oras po. Details po of next week's video forum to follow. Sa muli, have a blessed day po sa inyong lahat at maraming salamat po. Okay na po. Maraming salamat po, Sec Ging,
Salamat.
Yusek Abby, Kong Kim, Sec Susan, JCCM, Paring Bert, thank you so much. At sa ating pong mga